If Ulysses is not fit to read, life is not fit to live. James Joyce was a rebel. He was a rebel among rebels. And the most important thing in his life, that he had 2 children, Georgia and Lucia, with his long-time partner, Nora Barnacle. And he left Dublin at the age of 22, and he settled sometimes in Paris, then in Rome, Trieste, where he made friends with Italo Svevo, and Zurich. The most important features of Joyce's work were first a greater importance which was given to the inner world of the characters, and time, of course, was perceived as subjective, because the task of the writer was to render life objectively. And to do this, a part of isolation and detachment of the artist from society was necessary. If we take a look at the evolution of Joyce's style, we must say that the first part of his production is marked by a realistic approach. His plots are rather linear, language is controlled, and syntax is logical, and he uses also powerful symbols. In the second part of his production, we find ingredients that are more experimental. He uses the stream of consciousness technique to represent the uncontrolled flux of thoughts of the human mind. Dubliners is a collection of short stories about the people of Dublin. The seat of Dublin is a static and provincial town that gives its inhabitants no chance to grow and develop their personal potential. And the stories can be divided in groups: stories about childhood with a sense of disillusionment and failure, stories about adulthood with impossibility to escape, frustration, lack of freedom, stories about the relationship between the Irish people and their institutions, where we find paralysis and lack of life. The key theme is just the one of paralysis, which is both physical and spiritual. It means, on one part, the physical impossibility to escape, on the other part, the spiritual stagnation of the self. The key to each story in Dubliners is Epiphany. Epiphany is a special moment in which an object, an external object, a banal situation, an episode, is enough to lead the character to a sudden self-realization about himself or herself, or even about the reality surrounding him. So, surrounding her, as in the case of Evelyn, the story we have analyzed in Dubliners, and it is just a deep awareness. The characters in Evelyn are this young woman who's passive, influenced by her family's mentality, her father a violent and strict man, and Frank a very kind, open-hearted and brave boy. If we analyze the structure and style of Evelyn, this short story, we see that the story opens in medias res. She sat at the window, watching the evening invade the avenue. So we find the third-person narrator, but we are immediately aware of Evelyn's point of view, and the perception of time is subjective. What we have called Epiphany, the object, the external object, this time is a street organ played by an Italian, which reminds Evelyn of the promise she made to her dying mother. And in the story we have symbolic words like dust, which stands for decay and paralysis, and the sea is journey to her new house with Frank in Buenos Aires, C, which stands for action, which stands for escape. So the main themes are paralysis and the failure to find a way out of it. Ulysses, published in 1922, has a non-conventional plot. The novel is set in Dublin in one single day, June the 16th, 1904. And it is a detailed account of an ordinary life on one ordinary day in the life of the three main protagonists, and the theme is moral. Human life means suffering, but also struggling to seek the good. Joyce's focuses on the actions of three main characters, Stephen Dedalus, Leopold Bloom, and Molly, Bloom's wife. And each character stands for something. Leopold Bloom is Joyce's common man. He stands for the whole of mankind. Molly Bloom, Leopold's wife, stands for flesh, sensuality, fecundity, and Stephen Dedalus stands for pure intellect. He in fact embodies every young man seeking maturity. The relation to Odyssey is very clear in the structure, because Odyssey offers a structure framework for Ulysses. The characters and events are arranged around the Homeric model. So Leopold is opposite to Odysseus himself, and Molly is the antithesis of Penelope. Penelope is the faithful wife, Molly is the unfaithful wife, Stephen is the counterpart of Telemachus. Ulysses is divided into different chapters which follow the Odyssey structure, Telemachiad, Odyssey, and Nostos. The constant references to Homer Odyssey gives universality to the events narrated, and it implies that the past is superior to the present and is part of the mythical method that James Joyce uses for his masterpiece. But it is not only the link to the past which turns around the mythical method, because the mythical method is linked to the progress of the time, to the new science of the time, psychology, ethnology, anthropology, and it allowed the parallel with the Odyssey and provided the book with an added symbolic meaning. So the Homer's myth was used to express the universal in the particular, and in a sense it created a new form of realism. Ulysses represents a revolutionary prose. It is an epic novel that uses multiple styles, experimentation with words, styles, techniques. The use of stream of consciousness technique reflects the workings of the minds of the characters, so the thoughts are represented freely, without filters, and there is no logical or rational organization of thoughts, no traditional punctuation. And for this reason the language is rich in puns, paradoxes, images, interruptions, symbols, slang expressions, different linguistic register, and all together with the main aim to give voice to the unspoken activity of the mind. Now, if we make a comparison between the Victorian novel and Ulysses and the experimentation brought out by this masterpiece, we see that the precise setting in time and place of the Victorian towns like London and the English countryside were very realistic, whereas Dublin represents a European city and could be anything, but Dublin could be any European town. The narrative technique in the Victorian novel is third-person narrative technique. With the introduction of stream of consciousness technique, Ulysses make an extreme experimentation. So what was in the classical novel, the Victorian novel, the realistic and naturalistic subject matter, now everything happens inside the character's mind. And the characters that in a Victorian novel were presented from the outside now are presented mainly from the inside, while the language, which was realistic and concrete, now becomes the language of the mind. Bloomsday. In this picture you can see people celebrating Bloomsday in Dublin, which is every year on June the 6th, and it is a celebration of James Joyce's life and masterpiece Ulysses. Probably it is not going to be held this year because of the COVID-19, this coronavirus. Usually during this celebration, Bloom's route through the streets of Dublin is followed by participants in the festival with readings along the way, and they stop to read quotations from his masterpiece Ulysses.